Hello and welcome to the second episode about scrubbing. This is the big one because there are so many details to explore since our tracks can challenge us in so many different ways, especially when it comes to staying low over jumps and bumps. And so in this video I'm going to give some recommendations on which scrubbing variation you should use over which kind of obstacle. And to have some structure with this, I'll first rank them by their strengths and weaknesses in 3 different categories. And after I'll give my final thoughts. So there's a lot to unpack here, let's get to it. Alright, here we have our 3 categories: transition power, amplitude and rotation. I'll explain each category once we get to it, so let's just begin with the first one, transition power. Many times a scrub immediately follows a pump. It's one fluid motion, bending to extending to bending. But depending on what scrubbing variation you decide to use, the amount of power you're able to put into that transition will change. Especially at sections like this where the scrub really isn't that important. The landing is long and steep enough where even if you jump a little bit further, it's not an issue. That's why in this example it's the pump you get out of it that's more important than just to stay low. And nothing beats the knee scrub when it comes to the power you can put into that transition. Because you can extend your body all the way with more forward lean, and because of that you can push down longer, which gives you more acceleration. So the knee scrub takes the win in this category. The hip scrub comes in second, because you get a decent extension. But since it's so asymmetrical, you're just not as powerful as with a knee scrub. Third, when it comes to transition power, is the classic scrub. Because you get a good push, but you have to cut the extension short to pull up your knees in time. This gets very tricky on transitions that get steep fast. On a jump like that, the difference in power between knee and classic scrub is very obvious. All you can do with the classic scrub is to absorb the takeoff to be able to stay low. So you completely miss the opportunity to pump. While you can hit that ramp real hard with full arm swing for a split second if you use the knee scrub right. But there are a lot of obstacles that aren't steep enough for knee and hip scrub to work. That's where the classic style still shines, because the hurdle scrub is pretty weak since you basically use only one leg to push into the transition. But hurdling has many other advantages, like we'll see in category 2, amplitude. There are some obstacles that aren't about acceleration at all, like the tombstone feature we had in Edmonton 2 years ago, for example. What you need over sections like that is what I call a full scrub. You need to scrub off as much of the takeoff as you possibly can, meaning you need a big amplitude. This will allow you to hit that obstacle with a lot of speed and still make it down in time for the landing. So here you want to use a variation that maximizes this distance we already talked about last week. In this category I would say that we have a first place tie with hip and hurdle scrub. But the hurdle scrub has an asterisk attached to it. You need to be flexible in order to use it correctly. If you're able to bring your hips that close to the ice, like this guy to his hurdle, hats off to you, and you should go for that hurdle style anytime you want. However, if you're like me and dropping into the splits isn't your thing, I propose you try the hip scrub. And to explain why, I really only need to show one clip. Watch Patrick Merz here in 4th place, trying to save his race. Now, to get contact with the ice here is just insane because he's on the way down to the landing already. And unfortunately he hit it a bit too much with his knees and even with his butt, I think. And that's why he still flew too far. But he almost made it as low as you can go, and that's only possible with a hip scrub on an obstacle like that. Third is the classic scrub, because even if you're able to cover your ears with your knees, you still won't get as low over the edge of the jump compared to the hip and hurdle scrub. And finally, in last place, the knee scrub. Because your hips are extended, it's just the wrong choice if you need a full scrub. You can try to gain some amplitude by spreading the knees out, but it still remains in last place. Alright, we've reached our last category, rotation. As we've established in the previous episode, you create rotation by shifting your center of mass forward while still being in contact with the ramp. This is relatively easy on small features like that because you only need a little bit, especially with the knee or hip scrub. Watch the position I'm in the moment I lose ground contact. My takeoff angle is already very similar to my landing angle, so I only need a little bit of rotation. Let's compare this now to a classic scrub. Because I bring my knees up in front, I'm forced to ride up this transition way longer and I have to lean back. And just at the last moment I bring my upper body in front to initiate the rotation. So to make it from here to there, you need to rotate way more. And you can even see that I struggle a little bit to avoid falling on my butt. Now, the higher and steeper the obstacle gets, the more difficult it is to create enough rotation, since you simply have to cover more degrees, but also because your knees are in the way. You see here I try to push my upper body forward, but I also need to tuck the legs, so there's no room to move anymore and I'm trapped in this cannonball position. But that's not to say that this would be easier with a knee scrub, because it's actually the worst variation to use if you need a lot of rotation. Again, not to get confusing here, at this pump track section the knee scrub was the best choice because I didn't need to rotate much because of it. Here, however, I have no choice but to lean back because it's so tall. And as a consequence, it's more difficult to make it from this takeoff angle to the landing because the margin for error is so small. Once you started to bring your weight in front, you have to commit to it. Additionally, this position here is very awkward and hard to maintain for longer distances. Let's now shift to the winner of this category. To me, the best variation to get good rotation is the hip scrub. You get the same forward lean of the knee scrub, but with the benefit that you don't have to be so careful about hitting your knees on the edge of the jump. And the tucked position feels much more natural than the power slide posture of the knee scrub. So hip is in first, knee is last, and I'm not sure how to place the other two, to be honest. Over small obstacles I would give the edge to the hurdle scrub because you don't have to lean back as much, and on tall obstacles I think the classic scrub is easier to control, but maybe that's just because I'm not so experienced with it. Alright, so this here is my personal ranking, and here are my final thoughts. The classic scrub is super solid and you can use it over any feature, but it's not always the fastest option. Now, the hip scrub is my personal favorite. You can see it scored well in every category, and on top of that, it's the best variation to use when you have to scrub and turn at the same time. The downside is that it's a pretty wild motion and getting the timing perfect is very challenging. The knee scrub can be very fun and super fast, but sections where it makes sense to do it are rare. In all of my races I've only used it over 4 obstacles, I think. And finally, the hurdle scrub. I like this one because it's absolutely toe pick proof. Also because it's easy to get the timing right because you slide your foot through the whole transition, compared to a knee or hip scrub, for example, where it's one powerful push and then you have to leave the ramp. Alright, this video is already long enough, so I'll just add one more thing. Please be careful if you use the hip and especially the knee scrub. Oh. If you're not that experienced yet, stick to the basics first and work on your hurdle and classic scrub and try to perfect those. And if you always wanted to know more about pre-jumping, you're in luck because it's the topic of the next episode. So stay tuned.